Hello. How lovely that you're here. Actually, we're a bit surprised because we thought somebody else would be here. Now, Shada has been announced to who might join us or might not join us. I don't know. I was actually looking forward to Kiran Desai. I'm a great fan of Kiran Desai. If anybody came for Kiran Desai, please stay for us to. We'll do our best to do a Kiran for you.
Guten Abend, good evening, Vanakkam, Namaskaram, Salam, Zohar, using all the languages because we are going to talk about diaspora. We are going to talk about cultural identity, memory. Diasporic identities live in between languages, places, and memories, constantly shaped by what is remembered and what is lost. Across generations, these identities shift, hybridize, and challenge fixed ideas of culture, belonging, and inheritance. We are delighted to have two remarkable voices with us today. The third voice, Kiran Desai, the internationally acclaimed author of The Inheritance of Loss, who explores how migration and family histories shape lives across generations, cannot be with us today. We will proceed with equally competent, remarkable voices of German literature scene, who will bring in the Booker Prize as next on the list, I'm sure. So we have Mithu Sanyal, writer and public intellectual, who challenges fixed ideas of identity, language, and belonging in Germany today. And we have Hadija Haruna Ölker, journalist and storyteller, who brings these questions into everyday life, showing how diasporic identities and cultural memory are lived and felt. So, ja, genau. Yeah, so
Let's try again.
let's try again. A big applause. So my first question would have been to Kiran Desai, but it fits for all of us, in fact. Homi Bhava, to speak with him, he talks about hybridity and third space, and so embodying hybridity and fractured belonging. Then you have Stuart Hall, who says cultural identity is fluid and constantly reconstructed. Or is it the Gayatri Spivak take? Can the subaltern speak? Is it the subaltern voice? Would you like to comment on that in general?
I'm a fan of Homi Bhabha and Gayatri Spivak. Mainly, I'm a fan of Homi Bhabha when he is speaking. I can't read his books. I don't understand his books. And he said, I don't understand myself when I'm writing. So that is okay. So what I loved about Homi Bhabha is that he said literature is kind of the way we as a society tell ourselves who we are. So post-colonial studies starts with literature. So what's our place in literature? Where are we? Are we represented? Are our stories told, or are we invisible from that canon? And as a writer, it was incredibly difficult for me to write in the first person, to write in I, because I always had the feeling if I say I, either in a non-fictional or in a fictional text, I'm lying, I'm a liar. The I doesn't exist and it doesn't translate. So people will immediately have this idea of, well, I was writing in Germany and there were these ideas of these third world women. And so I have friends of friends coming to me and saying, aren't you happy that you don't have to live over there, meaning India? They're so nasty to their women. Isn't it nice for you that you can live here? And I think, wait a moment. Have you any idea which there you're talking about? Do you know anything of the role of women? Do you know that they had a female prime minister at a time when you couldn't even imagine that? And they say, no, they burn their women. So that's basically that's how much knowledge we've got about India in Germany. So the idea of saying I would always be to affirm this kind of victim third world womanhood, even though I also had the feeling I was an imposter to say I, meaning Indian womanhood, because everybody basically, the first question I was asked is, where you're from. And I had the feeling whatever I say is wrong. So I always said, oh, my mother comes from Poland. They say, Poland, Poland, duh. No, where are you really from? Where are your parents from? And so they went through everything. When I said, okay, India, they said, okay, do you speak Indian? There isn't a language called Indian. Do you speak one of the Indian languages? Yes, I do. Which one? English. That's the wrong one. But it was actually the main language. There was a thing called colonialism. Remember? No, we don't know about that. We haven't got colonialism. We haven't invented that in Germany yet. We went over that. Yes, you have, actually. So it is like if there isn't an idea of it, you can't affirm it, you can't relate to it. And it was incredibly, incredibly difficult until I basically decided, okay, literature's always lying. I'm going to be the best liar of them all.
Yep. Thank you for that. And Hadija, what is your take on this?
So I would mention Gayatri Spivak because her concept of learning and unlearning was very important for my books, and also to understand the German migration society as
Absolutely.
one where marginalized people were told a single story where they don't exist. So as a half German, my mother is a white German and my father is from Ghana, West Africa. It's very important to know your story because Black German history is not well known, not told by a bigger story, bigger picture, how it influences the German society. So when I got to know Gayatri Spivak's concept of learning and unlearning, this was an offer for society to not be in a guilt, which is also a problem in Germany, like a tradition of guilt because of the past, which was very full of violence. You might know the German past of persecuting and murdering the Jewish, not only Jewish people, but a mass of millions of Jewish people and other marginalized groups. And all these groups fought for their rights and for their visibility after 1945, also Black people. And so this unlearning concept of Gayatri Spivak was an offer to say we can all learn different things what we were told before.
Yeah, that really makes us think and go back how to negotiate the past in the present, what we will talk about once again, maybe tomorrow. So, Mithu, I come back to you again. You have noted that Indian diaspora in Germany was invisible for a long time compared to the UK and US. How does this lack of visibility shape the identity of a second generation German Indian differently than a British Indian, let's say?
That is very interesting because when I go to Britain, so my husband is British. So when we go to Britain and they know one of us is English and one of us is German, they always assume I'm the English one because they have an idea. He's white, by the way. So they always have an idea that kind of we have a shared history. They don't know enough about, they don't know anything really about Indian history, but there is this idea of that belonged to us once, so it is kind of our history. And in Germany you haven't got, so India is kind of non-existent. So I always joke that I never encountered any kind of racism towards myself as an Indian. I got a lot of racism for not being white. If people hear Indian, they might assume I'm Muslim, and I get anti-Muslim racism. But India, they love India. India has got the best food and the best, they can breathe the best. They've got yoga and Ayurveda, and they've got all this, and the Germans are absolutely into it. And they've got this idea of this Indo-European kind of connection, which is like, you are our past. So India is Germany's past. They have got this weird idea. So there is wise people in India. So India nowadays doesn't exist.
Yeah.
India only exists in the past as a historic country. And when I was starting on the radio, I was asked to do all the Indian themes because they said, oh yeah, genetically you are kind of qualified for that. So I had to go to exhibitions about Indian art. And it was always 2,000-year-old Indian art.
Absolutely.
It was never contemporary Indian art. It was like living Indians didn't exist. We didn't create anything. We had this ancient civilization, and that was awful. So it's really, really difficult. There are people love India, hate foreigners. No problem in Germany.
Yeah. Hadija, memory across generations. I want to ask you a question in that context. Diasporic families carry histories, stories, and sometimes silences from one generation to the next. How do you see cultural memory being transmitted or lost between generations in Germany today? And yeah, then I'll put a common question to both of you after you answer this.
Yeah, this is a very important question to my mind because it's, I mean, we can look on this migration society, which is full of, like, it's very international in Germany. We have so many people from all over the world. When you go, for example, to a restaurant, you will see the diversity of origin. And this could be a big celebration on the one hand. On the other hand, it isn't, because migration is told as a problem story very often for decades now. And so when I'm talking about migration society, many people don't see Germany as a migration society. It's still, there is a homogeneous idea of what a German is like, looks like. So when we talk about like intergenerational transfer of story, then we have many generations now in Germany. So my father migrated, many fathers and mothers migrated. We are second and third generation now. And sometimes the stories are not told. So this is the silence you were talking about. There is silence. Often the transfer is only by gesture, by many. We talked about the lack of language, that many children are not told the languages which their parents were taught in their childhood, or they make, and this is what we call transnational, how do you say, like this fluid identity, like Homi Baba is telling this, you have this fragmented identities, many young people searching for what can I be in Germany if I don't look like a German should look like. So
Yeah.
yeah. So at the end, we were talking about something which is very important, because the second and third generation made up the so-called post-migrant decade. And that was the change. I mean, we have here Sheda Bazia and Max Czolek, and we too, as representatives for a lot of young people and getting elder people who found language, who found this connection between these intergenerational identities and told, we are both, we don't need to decide. So there's a famous black German poetess, Mai Ayim, and she has a poem which is called Borderless.
Thank you. So a common question to both of you: how does writing from within the diaspora differ from writing about migration? Is there a difference according to both of you?
I'm so sorry. I need to answer that question as well, because the idea of how you can transfer memory, what it means, what memory loss means in families, what language loss means in families, that is very much central to everything I write about and to quite a lot I think about. And just noticing with my children, so they're living in a different world to the world I grew up in. They're living in the same country, but it's a different state. It was that the complete state has changed because we had reunification, and so now it's a different state, and they don't understand the world I grew up in. So a short while ago, we looked at photographs of me when I went to confirmation, so when at church, and they looked at it and said, "Is that from a different?" Not just decade, for them it's a different century. And yes, it is a different century, but you mean something else. It's like a world that's completely unconnected. So the past is always a different country. But it's like the old story with the broom. If you change the handle and a new handle and then you change the bristles and everything, is it still the same broom? Yes, because there's a continuity. But in families with a migrational background, it's usually that the continuity is broken. And we haven't got a system to tell stories and to celebrate that discontinuity, because all lives are discontinuous, and we kind of pretend that certain lives are and certain aren't. And I also noticed that loads of friends, when I was a child, I visited them and they had pictures on their walls of their grandparents, great-grandparents, and I noticed we haven't got those photographs. And I noticed then that even my mother's family hasn't got those photographs, because it's also a class thing. It's not just a race thing. So my mother's family came, they were workers, they went into the coal mines, and I don't know what my mother's grandparents looked like. I know what my grandmother looks like, but that's it. I have no images of them and very, very few stories. And to celebrate these stories and say these stories are our stories. And it's very, when I wrote my first novels, for non-fictional books and fictional books, and when I wrote my first novel, journalists came to me and said, oh, we really love your book, but is it real literature? Because real literature in Germany means either stories about the Holocaust or stories about the German Democratic Republic. So about these German stories, which I think, yes, and it's all connected. We all have connections to that. And why can't we see that? The world doesn't begin and end in Germany. Germany is connected to the world. No man is an island, and no Germany is an island either.
Thank you. That's vivid. Would you like to speak about the diasporic, the writing from within the diaspora? Writing from within the diaspora, how is it different from writing as a migrant or about migration?
I think when I was saying that migration stories are often told as a problem, this is the change in how, like, when authors which call themselves however, because we have many definitions for us who are, and then they find a language and they find like stories which empower people, empower themselves, for example. I mean, you were talking about the forms of the kind of books we write. So it's often a problem. Is this new German literature? What is it? Is it German literature? I would say it's German literature. But this way to come to this place, like we were making jokes that we are here representing Germany. You can see people in Germany
Absolutely.
asking, are these German authors? So it's very interesting to have this wider perspective and writing texts where you can find yourself and read texts from others where you find yourself, like not talking about problems, like talking about life.
Yeah.
And it's also in Germany, and that has a lot to do with our idea of being German. We think migration only means first generation. Somebody comes to Germany, because you have this idea, they come to Germany and they leave again. Because for a long, long time, you couldn't become German when you didn't have a German father. So Germany was something you imbued by blood. You had to have German blood. We've all got human blood, I hope. I don't know, maybe we're all aliens, but there's definitely no German blood in the world. And so the idea that if people wanted to hear the story how I came to Germany, and I said, yeah, I was born here. I was just that was how I came to Germany. Probably the same way that you came to Germany. And the idea that there's a second generation, there's a third generation, and what it means, and that these stories also are real stories. And they said, no, then migration just stops and doesn't exist any longer. And but on the other hand, when they do a census, then it does count whether you have a person, a father or mother who has got a migrational background, or a grandparent. Then that counts. So it's really weird. So it doesn't count when you're talking about stories, but it does count when you're talking about politics. Yeah. And then when they said, okay, if you say that is part of your history, then you've got to prove that you're a real Indian, meaning they wanted me to be a cliche of what they imagined Indian womanhood to be. So
Wow.
incredibly
Yeah.
passive,
Yeah.
and if you broke with that, like any modern Indian woman would do, then
That's
you
where-
were westernized, then you weren't authentic. And then, well, wait, but that means I could never grow. I would always be in this kind of I don't know, glass sarcophagus, like Snow White, sleeping forever.
So that latches on beautifully to my next question to you, Mithu. You can keep the mic, because your regular reference to Uma Narayanan's term, death by culture. How do Orientalist fantasies about oppressed Indian women create a trap for diasporic women who are trying to define their own self-determination?
Oh dear, how much time have we got? I wrote about that in my second book. It's a book about rape, and what was very interesting to me was that we had this idea that if you were a white woman, the probability that people believed you when you went to the police and reported rape was a lot higher than if you were not white. If you were black, it was the lowest, which is incredible. So you notice all these old stereotypes feeding into nowadays into our current problems. And there was this idea about femicide, so about men killing women. And they had this idea that if it's a brown man killing a brown woman, then it's their culture. It's that these are honor killings because they have these weird ideas. If it's a white man killing a white woman, then it's a tragedy. And it's the same thing. So, and we all have incredibly outdated ideas, and we all have incredibly progressive ideas. But we have this kind of linear idea of history where we think in certain people are further back on this kind of weird era of history, and certain people are further forward, and the most forward are the white people. So we also speak about emancipation, about feminism, as if this is just something white women do and have to teach brown and black women. And to notice that we are all teachers and we're all learners, we're all students at the same time. That is an idea that is really, really difficult to communicate. And so it was difficult because when I was writing about that, it was perceived as, oh, then you mean it's not a problem when brown women... Yes, it is a problem, but it's not culture who killed them. It's a certain person, it's a perpetrator who kills them.
Absolutely, yeah, thank you. And Hadija, now also a question to you about living between words. Is it difficult? Yeah, the South tradition. Yeah, living between worlds. Your work often explores lives shaped by migration and social expectations. How do your characters, and in your own experience, navigate between being between cultures or languages, and what does belonging feel like in that in-between space? For you and for your characters both.
You were talking about the I. So in my books, in the first two, there is the I person, and it's myself. So it's a memoir, which is like a useful tool, like bell hooks and Audre Lorde, like famous Black authors from the US used to describe more scientist research results about people like us being marginalized, having this migration background, but even more, because what I want to bring a focus on is that we are not only the story of our origin, we are much more. We call it the intersectional perspectives. So this is the kind of thinking which I was taught, and which I like understand human beings, is that our differences are in between us. We are not only male or female. We are old or young. We are like queer or heterosexual. We have like many genders. We have so many things. We are abled or disabled, and we are all like different in this kind. And so when you are asking me how I try to tell stories, then it's like to combine all these things, but even have a focus on my story so that people can connect, but always open, wide, that people can connect with me because we have something in common. And I think this is like a way to find something which is really needed in these days, which is called solidarity or boundaries. It's like, because we are, simple said, all human beings at the end.
Yeah. So the next question would be then, your work moves between intimate personal experiences and broader social analysis, as we know, and you mentioned. This form is called memoir, right? So how has your own diasporic background shaped the way you understand identity, difference, and belonging across generations? Now I'm talking about across generations because, this is also...
I mean, I could start now to talk about my story of my father and my mother.
Yeah.
But I think it's interesting maybe out of an Indian perspective when you are mixed race. So I have the story of my Ghanaian father, which is like, was born in times of colonialism. And I have my white mother, which was born after Second World War II. So I have this post-colonial identity, and I have this post-national socialism identity. And both is my story, born and raised in Germany. And so I would say, like, identities like mine challenge the German memory culture, because in a way of telling stories, we don't exist, or we challenge the story, this one single story. And so this is the kind of where I need to write myself in. I hope this answers.
Yeah.
This is incredibly interesting, because I absolutely love that, and I love that you start from yourself. And I'm coming at literature from the other direction. So the I in my literature is never me. So the literature I write is a storytelling literature. They're characters, and reviewers always say, "Oh, there is a person, and she's got maybe an Indian background, so she's you. So this is your autobiography." And so my second novel is a time traveling novel, and I say, "Yes, that's autobiography. I've time traveled. Shall I tell you where I went to?" And they go, "Yes," and they don't even notice that it's irony. So it's a privilege to be able to say I, and it's also a privilege to be able to be universal and to have a kind of I can play roles, I can tell stories that will relate to you, even though you have got a different background, or maybe you've got the same background, or maybe because I can't even speak about myself truthfully. I don't know myself completely. So how could I? How could anybody?
Yep, right.
So obviously it's all kind of storytelling. So I'd like to go completely the other way. I want to invent worlds. And when I started out writing, I thought I would be a science fiction writer. And then I noticed I'm not interested in the future because the future gets old so much quicker. I'm much more interested in the past, because the past is what we can change, because we've all got these ideas about the past determines us. So when we change the past, we also change what we can imagine ourselves to be.
Yeah, so thanks for this explanation. This flows in beautifully to into my next question. How do you see cultural memory operating in your work? That would have been the next question. Is it primarily a burden that shapes identity politics, or can it also be a resource for reimagining solidarity and new forms of belonging?
I love Oscar Wilde. I absolutely love Oscar Wilde. And there's one quote of Oscar Wilde where he said, "I always travel with my diary, and I've always got something interesting to read." And I love that. But I also love the idea that in this kind of these other story traditions. So, for example, Black African storytelling traditions have been writing autobiography, but not just once, again and again and again and again. And it's always a different book. So there's not one autobiography, there's not one memory. And to basically say, this is what makes us human, that our memory is not a recorder, our memory is a creative machine. And
Beautiful.
And it also means, like if you asked me 20 years ago, how was your childhood? I would say it was so tragic, and everybody has been very, very sorry for myself. It was true. But if you ask me now how my childhood was, it was brilliant. It was a great childhood, lovely books, and this is true too. Both stories are true at the same time, and it is a resource you can use. And also, loads of things that I'd struggled with, like this not belonging, is also it's the best thing, because belonging is like it's like shackles. They chain you to one kind of reality, and the world is always multi-layered. I mean, even the political world, we're going away from a single polarity to a multipolarity. And that is so brilliant. I was asked for the WDR, for the German radio, how is this festival? What are they talking about? I said, oh yeah, there are many panels about the decline of the West. Silence. Really? So yes, that is what the rest of the world is seeing, and we're behind in Germany.
Thank you. Would you like to comment on this as well?
Yes, I can do so. I mean, when it's interesting, I start from another round because we know each other for a long time, and we also work together. For out of a journalist perspective, we have something which was called a feminist press round, and this is also part of like how you can tell a story. It's like on an analytical base, which is asking, is this kind of world what we get to know? Is it the world like we would tell about? So when you were telling about how you construct your I or not your I and the storyteller, I was thinking I'm a journalist. So it's not about like what kind of storytelling do I do to transfer this complexity of our society. And I would say that in my books, I engage these three levels of identity questions, but also political analysis of very actual topics, which we are talking about now, not only about the sociological aspects, by the facts and the news which we have. So this is the combination, which is, it doesn't find a form often. So you need to create new forms of writing too. And this is also like an in-between I am in, because you are always framed in a way. Are you an author? Are you a journalist? Are you an activist? What are you talking, from which position do you write or work out when you talk about marginalized positions, about justice, about race? Because, and this is also important to me, I not only want to talk about the past, I want to talk about the real problems like racism, ableism, like sexism, and in the nowadays, which are founded like in the past, but still exist. And there is no language in Germany often for the different forms we have. So we also need to create new words. And literature offers many options to create words. But when you're a journalist, you always need to switch back and forth.
Beautifully put. So that opens more possibilities of dealing with the creative space, or sometimes you have to create that space, pushing the boundaries. So now maybe we can talk about your books. So the Identity, the book. In that book, you dramatize how colonial histories and racial identities are remembered and contested. That is my understanding of that book. So how do you see cultural memory functioning in Europe today with reference to identity? Is it a tool for solidarity, or does it deepen the divisions?
Oh dear, that's a very big question. Actually, for me, the book, everybody says, oh, it's a book about cultural appropriation, because my main character is a professor who pretends to be a person of color. In Germany, everybody says, oh, your main character is somebody who pretends to be a people of color. No, people of color is a plural, but doesn't matter. Anyway, so she pretends to be a person of color, and then it turns out, no, she's white. And it's not that she's white, she's also white from a very middle to upper class background. And so everybody says, oh, it's a book about cultural appropriation. But I needed that character because I wanted to write about being mixed race in Germany. And you can't write about identity because identity isn't a thing that exists. Identity always exists in contrast, in communication with an outside. And if there's a denial about this mixed raceness, I mean, we do exist as people, but there was always this idea of that we would cease to exist. The hope was and if you look at literature, so the mixed race characters, either they committed suicide or they went crazy, so they were put into a lunatic asylum, or they died conveniently. So they were taken out of the story. When you started having characters like that who were kind of self-confident and speaking, that was the 1990s, that was the Buddha of Suburbia, Hanif Qureshi, and he spoke from a British perspective, but he was still the first book. So I read that book like a Bible and thought, he said everything I want to say. I'd never need to write another novel again. Obviously, there are loads of other stories to tell, but it was so important. And it also showed you how little was known about it in Germany. And when my book came out, so many people wrote to me and said, thank you. It's the first time I feel represented in German literature, which is what you want as an author, and it's also incredibly sad. It says a lot about German literature. Actually, it's not true. As you all know, Thomas Mann was mixed race too. Thomas Mann, the very famous German author, was mixed race. Nobody knows that. Thomas Mann's mother was Brazilian. She came from Brazil. She wasn't a Brazilian, she was from Brazil. And so she came to his hometown, Lübeck, and she encountered so much racism here. And Thomas Mann's brother Heinrich wrote a novel about Julia, and it was called Between the Races. That was the title of the novel. So it was very, very clear for the family that they were mixed race. They encountered loads of problems with the Nazis because of being mixed race. When I went to school, when I went to university, I studied German literature, and for us, he was the whitest of white German authors. Why was that cut out of the story? Because what can't be is not told. It's erased from our memory. So even literature, history is whitened out.
Thank you.
So so the title of
Hadija, I also want you to respond to a question regarding your book after this remark of yours or a comment. Schönheit der Differenz. beauty of difference.
I wanted to combine it because it's a perfect match what you were saying when you're talking about identity. So my book would be labeled as a book about identity, but I wanted to reframe a very political, like strong word into a concept of understanding our society in a better way, because I think we all are grown up with ideas of people and how they are, and I try to invite people to go with me on my journey of understanding difference. And the beauty of difference is how I look or how I see people. And so I have these chapters in my book where I started with myself and my different identities, which you can see or which you can don't see, because we have like visible and invisible identity markers in ourselves. And then describing all these markers, all these biographical identities from people I know, my friends, my family, like people around me, which I find important. And then to show that we can learn about the living and the biographies of the others we might don't know. They are not the others, the foreigners, or the people who have a different gender, the people who have a different religion, the people who have, you can add that on. And then you start like a story of understanding. And the goal is at the end where I close the chapter with my child. So I'm Black, as you can see, and I'm female, and my child is a child of color and is disabled. So I closed the chapter to a not often talked about topic in Germany, which is disability. And at the end, I hope that people can understand that the beauty of difference and a society, which is a plural society, as I said now, is like living in coexistence and is built up by not sameness, but difference and in acceptance. And this is the most hard ways for societies. And I think this is a problem all over the world.
Yeah.
Can I add something to that? That is very, very interesting, because it's also, we have this idea that the people who are othered, they're all one group, they're all a kind of homogenous group. And there's this one feeling of being at home, like with people like you, with people like Shada, and with people like Max, and in this BIPOC community, and it's a very warm and feeling of being accepted, which is wonderful. But there are also differences between us, and we've got different challenges. So my second novel, Antichristi, there are two friends, and so they're both they're best friends, and the one always says, "Oh, we're both from the Indian diaspora." And at one point, Shazia turns and says, "Well, I'm not. So my parents come from Pakistan, and there's a problem here that you just make me invisible. You make my history invisible." And she says it. So my first character, Durga, says it because it's a labor of love. You're both the same, and yes, we are, and we're also different, and it doesn't matter. It is both. It is like it is.
Yeah. So, Mithu, I'm now referring to the anthology. You have contributed to it with the title, Your Homeland is Our Nightmare. So, how does the traditional German concept of Heimat, homeland, or Heimaten, homelands, that is your take now, exclude those with plural identities, and can it ever be reclaimed?
Well, first of all, you can't translate it, which is not your fault because it doesn't exist. It's a very German word. We took your homeland is our nightmare from the homeland security in America. So because they defined who is us and who is not us. But in Germany, we had these new ministries, and they were homeland ministries, kind of modeled on this American idea of who to expel, basically. And like I said before, the idea in Germany was you could only be German if your father had been German. And that was changed in the year 2000, which is not that long ago, so that people whose parents had migrated to Germany could become German. There were people who had been born in Germany, who had lived in Germany all their lives, who worked in Germany, paid taxes, and they couldn't become German. They were othered, which also meant they couldn't participate in loads of aspects of democracy, and which questions, is it a democracy if so many of the people living in a country have no say in it? Is that right? And immediately, the year 2000 was the same year that the far right-wing parties said, yes, but they're not real Germans, they're just passport Germans, they're just paper Germans, like we were fictional Germans. So we were out-Germaned in the same breath that we legally could become German. And just last year in Germany, you had this new discussion, immigrants who have become Germans and who've got dual nationality. Can we expel them and can we take away their German nationality if they commit a crime? And crime was very vaguely, if they go to a demonstration that we don't like. Wow. And that was at the same time I was trying, so I used to have an Indian passport when I was born, obviously because I didn't have a German father. And I was thinking of getting my OCI card. And I stopped that. So the far right-wing parties made it necessary for me to get a visa to come to India now. That's their fault.
Hadija, it's again, I'm going to ask you a question regarding in between identities and memory culture. But before that, if you want to refer to the podcast, Trauer and Turnschuh, because we are talking about culture of remembrance or memory culture that has long been shaped by a focus on historical responsibility. So how do in between or post-migrant identities, especially those without a direct familial link to these histories, how they fit into this, the challenge or expand Germany's culture of remembrance? What is the situation? Because
a complex situation.
Yeah.
So there's Max Czolek, my co-author of the third book, Alles auf Anfang, so starting from the beginning, which is like an actual political analysis of the situation in Germany. But you were asking about the podcast, and this podcast is well connected to what I was saying before. Like when you start to understand identities and identity politics, asking yourself, who am I with my origin and my socialization, then you come to the past. And then you come to the German past and the violence in the German past. Then you will find out that there are lacks in the stories you were told, that you need to recover story, that you need to tell another story. And this is the start somehow of our podcast, where we make like an idea of what a plural memory culture could look like, which includes all these stories which are missing. And like Max Czolek is a Jewish author and poet, and I have this post-colonial background, as I said. Then you can see, and this is all German story. And we were told, for example, that these stories are separated; they can't exist next to each other. Like, what does it mean if you stop this dominant narrative?
Right.
If you like to begin to tell the stories in the balance of nowadays, because our past is shaping our present. And here we are in a present in Germany where we have, as you said, the right-wing party, which has so many voters, and and the idea of that this past will not repeat is not clear. So when you ask me, and this was your question, how are the people involved, the young people with migration background who have nothing to do with the German history and the German violence which happened before 1945, then they are like the mirror to the not to the problems we still have with racism, anti-Semitism, and all. Sometimes it's their fault. Sometimes they just experience the violence which still went on after 1945.
So that they are still on the other side at the receiving end. So that collective memory of the Germany or so-called Germany, even by being a German national on paper, they are not able to identify with that collective memory or remembrance.
This is the one thing, not to identify with a story which is not your story, but to be affected by the consequences of a story which is not
Right.
which is that we have so many victims and we have so many people who murdered in this time of National Socialism and who didn't went to court, who went on working. We have German families who don't talk about what happened in their own families. So it all affects the nowadays racism and anti-Semitism, which we still face in Germany. And sometimes, and this is like an actual debate, is like, who is the one who is the most like problem person? And we have like a big anti-Muslim racism in Germany, for example, like increasing anti-Semitism in Germany. And you can ask yourself, how can that be?
Yeah.
I would really like to add to that, because that is so interesting, because you've got this new concept. So our government, not just our government, but also our government are saying, oh yes, there are these foreigners coming to Germany importing their anti-Semitism. And I always think, we could do that very well ourselves. We didn't need to import it. It's fine. And that is so shocking that we are othering our own history. And we're actually saying, because we had this history, we've learned from it, and now we're so much better. And these other people who haven't committed genocide, they haven't gone through the process of learning from it, which is such an awful thing to say, but this is actually the political discourse in Germany at the moment. And it's also because we teach history so unconnected. So when I went to school, we all had fascism. So we went to our school system and we were taught about fascism, which is important. But it was also, we were the perpetrators, which is absolutely right, but there were all these, in my school class, there were all these kids from all these different countries, 50% of my class, coming from different countries, and it wasn't their history as such. It was their history, but not as such. So, for example, my grandfather, my father's father, was in the Indian Army. So, because they were still ruled by the British, he fought for the British against Hitler. So that is a history that is not told, and it all belongs together. And we're telling these people, they're telling me, oh, you're importing your anti-Semitism. No, we helped free Germany from fascism.
Yeah. So now I think I'll ask a common question again, because we are left with 11 minutes, and then we'll open the session for audience interaction. Looking across your books and experiences and thinking about the next generation growing up between languages, memories, and places, what do you hope they will be able to hold on to or retain? And what would you like them to feel free to let go of when it comes to identity and belonging? A long question. Should I repeat, Hadija, or you
I'm
want
just
to
thinking.
Okay.
I think I would make it short. Feel themselves as part of the story, and part of the story in the country they live in. Like, I mean, when we have this, there's this German word Heimat, like
Heimat.
home, and it's like as home, like as you were saying about the book, your home is my nightmare. I forgot what the title is. Your homeland is my nightmare. Whatever. It's like that. The many young people are not connected, and we have a new generation coming which is younger than we are, our kids, and the kids are coming, and they still face the same problems and the same questions, and it's even a bigger backlash they are facing. So when I have a wish is that they feel part of a story. And so this is also maybe our part of literature, like going on writing stories where they can connect.
Thanks.
This is a moment where I'm really sad that Kiran Desai can't be here, because her second novel, The Inheritance of Loss, it was very important for me, but it's something that I kept thinking about again and again. I'm looking at my son, who is now 22, and he had to write an essay because he was applying he wanted to study psychology. He was applying for that. He had to write an essay, and all he was writing about was how lost he felt between the cultures. So what I've given him is my feeling of falling between the cracks, loss of identity, the inheritance of loss. This is what I've given him. And I had hoped I'd given him so much more. I'd hoped I'd given him the repertoire to work against that. And he said, no, actually, it's the opposite. It's awful. And that really shocked me, because I thought I was so much more conscious about it than my parents, who never spoke about certain things, and they definitely never spoke about race. If they spoke about racism, they said, it's so good that we don't have racism anymore. I said, I'm gonna kill you in any minute. And so it is kind of it stays difficult, and it's kind of this staying with the troubles. That's the only thing you can do, and it will be a strength one day. It will be a superpower one day. It will take a long time.
Thank you, Mithu and Hadija. So this was an intense and interesting interaction. Now we open the floor for the audience. If you want to ask a question, raise your hand, introduce yourself, and formulate a question, and not a longish statement, please. And let us know who you want to address it to. Okay, then I come back to both of you. If you would want to put a question to each other, if you want to ask a question to each other regarding your expression, artistic, creative expression, by that time somebody will formulate a question maybe. Is there a question? Not yet. Okay. We can also end.
So maybe I would. It's interesting because I asked you so many questions when we had this press round. Like every month we had this. So maybe what will be the topic you wanted to talk today when you're like having this experience being in India after a very long time, as I heard, looking to your books, your identity work, and being here now? What does it make to you? Is there a connection, a different one than before?
Wow. It is a bit like breaking a spell, because that is another thing. The problem is with having a diasporic connection to India is it's so far away and it's so expensive to get here. So my childhood was, I came here with my parents until I went to school, and then we stopped because obviously you can't come to India we have only, the winter break is very short at school. So you don't come for a week. And that meant my father always went to India for 6 weeks. He saved up all his holidays. He went to India for 6 weeks, usually over Christmas, which was a big deal for my mum. And I went with my mum on holiday to the Netherlands, which nobody knows. That is really not comparable. It's really not as nice as India. And so in a way, it was like, I have these childhood memories of India, then I had memories when I was studying and I came here, and then there was a break when I had children. And it's like, I know 3 different Indias, and also what is different now is really, I'm not visiting my family. It's brilliant not to visit your family. Nobody should be made to just visit their family. And the lovely thing is, I'm meeting people who are doing similar things to me. I don't feel like the odd one out. I felt like the odd one out with my family in Germany, and I felt like the odd one out with my family in India. So they're actually very, very similar kinds of families. But I'm meeting people who are writing and who are thinking and who are basically engaging with the world in a political or similar way, and we have so much more in common than you have just by blood ties.
Thank you.
I would like to ask you, especially because you, when you went to Ghana for the first time, how was it for you? Because I was so impressed that you did that, and that you did that more than once, because it was like the fear of, I go there and then everybody will turn around and say, you're not allowed in.
So this is an interesting question, because before I went to the African continent, there was this way I need to go in, like, finding my Black German identity. And we have a Black movement in Germany. There's like a initiative of Black people in Germany. So when I was a student, and when I was younger, I was influenced by the first books which came out in the 80s. There's just a few literature aspects, but I was happy that when I was 16 that I got this information, because my father didn't went to Ghana because of the money things. It's expensive. I'm coming from a working class family, so I was there once when I was a child. And then my first trip didn't went to Ghana. I went to Senegal, which is a different country because the French people have been colonizing Senegal. But I did it because I knew when I would go there, I would see Black old people for the first time. And I thought I need some first entry before I go to the homeland of my father. And the second thing is that I never expected, because I was taught by this Black German movement, that I'm not expecting to find home in Ghana. I'm not going there and I'm always saying I'm filling a puzzle. Something which was missing, I will find. Maybe not home, but something different. And that made it more open. And then I started to travel the continent because I knew that many people in Germany, they have a very narrow-minded idea of the African continent. I don't know how much you know about the African continent. So I start to travel countries that I changed the story. And then I went back to Ghana. And then this became my story. And I see the difference of origin because Ghana is now my home. And I want, for example, to get a passport now, also for my son. And this changed. And it also changed because of the political problems in Germany.
Yeah, this reminds me of two books that we recently translated in the social translating project. One is Ronja Ortmann's Die Zoma and Sasha Stanish's Herkunft. And a similar line of thought and narrative that they have developed and similar arguments as well. So the real question is who gets to belong in Germany today. And in Germany, debates around the light culture and integration and national identity have intensified again. And yeah, people argue against fixed ideas of origin and authenticity. So it's high time that a genuinely inclusive notion of belonging has to be found, or like how would it look like in post-migrational Germany, let's say?
Oh God. Well, if you'd asked me that question even 3 years ago, I would have said we are changing the landscape and we are redefining who belongs and who doesn't. And we're still, probably, I'm speaking for both of us, we're still reeling from the backlash. And it's been so vicious and it came so fast. And I still think we are redefining it, but it's basically because it's a political question. You're not allowed to despair. If I were allowed to, I would despair immediately. I did an interview with the newspaper, and it was about bank holidays. And one of the things I said is that we've got this massive community of Muslims in Germany. We should have one Muslim bank holiday day. And also because of our history, we should definitely have a Jewish one. I still get letters and emails but by people complaining about it. How could I do that? And this is just basically breaking up society, and you can't go into a different country and demand a holiday. And I say, why? We just want to give you a free day. Aren't you happy that you don't have to work? No, not if it's for the Muslims.
I just make it short because time is over. In our book, which I wrote with Max Czolek, which is like starting from the beginning, we are thinking at how can we move on. And we took the quote of Audre Lorde, we were never meant to survive. And so for the people who are suppressed, they always need to go on. I mean, when we're never meant to survive, we're still here. So thank you for the invitation.
She spoke about that book, and we are going to have the next session tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. at German Pavilion with Mark Scholek and with Hadija. So do join us tomorrow. Thanks for being a wonderful audience today. Very responsive. I'm sure you are taking a lot. There's a lot of takeaways, and let it sink in, and maybe you come up with questions tomorrow. Until then, have a good evening. Thank you.